What if I told you that the woman who disappeared wasn't even real? That the person everyone's been searching for might have never existed at all? And that two of the sharpest minds in Haven City just spent 3 days chasing a ghost who left behind two names, two faces, and two impossible stories that can't both be true? Look, I'm not asking you to believe me yet. I'm asking you to listen. Because what happened in Haven City in the winter of 1941 changed everything we thought we knew about identity, deception, and how easy it is to vanish in plain sight. This isn't just another missing person case. This is about a woman who disappeared twice from the same city within 72 hours, leaving behind a paper trail that proves she was two completely different people. And when Detective Vince Mallory and journalist Veronica Vale finally pieced together what really happened, they realized the truth was so twisted that even they almost didn't believe it. So stick around, because by the end of this story, you're going to question everything you think you know about trust, truth, and the shadows that live between them. It started on a Tuesday morning in December. Haven City was covered in a thin layer of frost that made everything look cleaner than it actually was. The kind of cold that bites at your fingers and makes you walk faster just to feel something warm again. Detective Vincent Mallory was sitting at his desk in the precinct, halfway through a lukewarm cup of coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, when the call came in. A woman had been reported missing. Nothing unusual about that. People go missing all the time in a city like Haven City. But this case was different, and Mallory could tell that right away from the tone in Captain Hewitt's voice when he dropped the file on his desk. The missing woman's name was Catherine Eldridge, 32 years old, worked as a secretary at the Pemberton Insurance Company on Fifth Avenue, lived alone in a modest apartment on the east side. No family in the city, no close friends that anyone could name. She hadn't shown up to work for 3 days, and her landlord reported that her apartment looked like she'd left in a hurry. The door was unlocked. Her coat was still hanging on the rack. Her purse was on the kitchen table, but Catherine Eldridge was gone. Mallory studied the photograph clipped to the file. Catherine had dark hair, styled in neat waves, pale skin, and eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. She was pretty in that quiet, understated way that made you look twice. The kind of woman who could disappear into a crowd without anyone noticing. And maybe that was exactly what she'd done. But here's where it gets interesting. While Mallory was reading through Catherine Eldridge's file, across town at the offices of the Haven City Tribune, journalist Veronica Vale was reading a very different file about a very different woman. This woman's name was Isabelle Rousseau. She was a French expatriate, 31 years old, who worked as a hostess at the Sapphire Room, one of the more upscale nightclubs in the theater district. She'd also been reported missing, also 3 days ago, also by someone who noticed her sudden and unexplained absence. Vale had a nose for stories that didn't add up. She'd spent the last 5 years building a reputation as the kind of journalist who didn't just report the facts but dug until she found the truth buried underneath them. And something about Isabelle Rousseau's disappearance smelled wrong. The woman who'd reported her missing was another hostess at the club, a woman named Dottie Marsh, and when Vale interviewed her, Dottie kept saying the same thing over and over. Isabelle wasn't the type to just leave. She was careful, always careful. She told me once that she'd made mistakes in the past, and she couldn't afford to make any more. Vale pressed her. "What kind of mistakes?" Dottie shook her head. She never said, but I got the feeling she was running from something, or someone. That afternoon, Vale went to Isabelle Rousseau's apartment. It was in a better part of town than you'd expect for a nightclub hostess. The building had a doorman, and the apartment itself was furnished with taste. Nothing extravagant, but everything was clean, organized, elegant. The kind of place where someone had taken the time to care about the details. But just like Catherine Eldridge's apartment, Isabelle's showed signs of a hasty departure. A half-packed suitcase on the bed, clothes draped over a chair, a teacup on the nightstand, still full, the tea long since gone cold. Vale stood in the middle of the apartment and tried to piece it together. Who was Isabelle Rousseau? And why did it feel like she'd been expecting to leave but had been interrupted before she could finish? It wasn't until 2 days later that Mallory and Vale's paths crossed. They were both following leads that had taken them to the same place. A small boarding house on the south side of the city, run by a woman named Mrs. Greta Hoffman. Mrs. Hoffman was a gray-haired, sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who didn't miss much. When Mallory knocked on her door, she answered with a suspicious frown. "If you're here about the rent, I already told the agency I'm not interested in selling." Mallory showed her his badge. "I'm here about a missing woman, Catherine Eldridge. I was told she stayed here for a few nights last month." Mrs. Hoffman's expression shifted. "Catherine?" "Yes. She stayed here. Quiet girl. Paid in advance. Kept to herself." "Did she say why she was here? Where she was going?" "Mrs. Hoffman hesitated. "She said she was in town for work. Something about needing a place to stay while she sorted out some personal business. But she didn't stay long. Maybe a week. Then she left." "Did she leave a forwarding address?" "No. Nothing like that." Mallory was about to press further when the door opened again, and Veronica Vale walked in. She stopped when she saw Mallory, her eyes narrowing. They knew each other, of course. Mallory and Vale had crossed paths more than once over the years. Sometimes they worked together. Sometimes they got in each other's way. But they always ended up in the same place eventually, chasing the same stories, the same truths. Vale looked at Mrs. Hoffman. "I'm here about Isabelle Rousseau." Mrs. Hoffman blinked. "Who?" "Isabelle Rousseau. French woman. Dark hair. Early 30s. I was told she stayed here recently." Mrs. Hoffman shook her head slowly. "I don't know anyone by that name." Mallory and Vale exchanged a glance. Something wasn't right. Mallory pulled out the photograph of Catherine Eldridge and showed it to Mrs. Hoffman. "Is this the woman you knew as Catherine Eldridge?" Mrs. Hoffman studied the photograph and nodded. "Yes, that's her." Vale pulled out her own photograph. The photograph of Isabelle Rousseau. She held it next to Mallory's. The two women in the photographs were identical. Same face, same dark hair, same pale skin, same eyes. Mrs. Hoffman stared at the two photographs, her face going pale. "That's impossible. That's the same woman." And that's when Mallory and Vale realized they weren't looking for two missing women. They were looking for one woman who'd been living two completely different lives. Catherine Eldridge and Isabelle Rousseau were the same person. But how? And why? And more importantly, where was she now? They decided to work together. It made sense. Mallory had the resources of the police department, and Vale had the instincts of a journalist who knew how to dig into places the police couldn't reach. They started by comparing the two identities. Catherine Eldridge had a social security number, a work history, a rental agreement. Everything checked out. Isabelle Rousseau had references from the Sapphire Room, a lease signed under her name, even a library card. Everything checked out there too. Both identities were real. Both had been used actively. Both existed simultaneously. But here's where it gets even stranger. When they dug deeper, they found that Catherine Eldridge had only existed for 8 months. Before that, there was no record of her anywhere. No birth certificate. No previous addresses. No employment history. She'd simply appeared in Haven City in April of 1941 and started building a life from scratch. Isabelle Rousseau had the same problem. She'd shown up in Haven City in May, just 1 month after Catherine, and had also built a life out of nothing. Vale leaned back in her chair at the precinct, running her fingers through her hair. "So we're dealing with someone who created 2 separate identities in the span of a month. Why would anyone do that?" Mallory was pacing. He always paced when he was thinking, because she was hiding from something, or someone. She built 2 lives so that if one was compromised, she could disappear into the other. But both are compromised now. She disappeared from both identities at the same time. Exactly. Which means whatever she was running from finally caught up to her. Or she decided it was time to vanish for good. They started interviewing people who'd known both versions of the woman. At the Pemberton Insurance Company, Catherine Eldridge's co-workers described her as quiet, efficient, and polite. She kept to herself, never went to lunch with anyone, never talked about her personal life. One coworker, a man named Harold Beck, said something that stuck with Mallory. She was the kind of person you'd never remember seeing, like she was trying not to be noticed. At the Sapphire Room, the story was different. Isabelle Rousseau was charming, outgoing, and spoke with a faint French accent that made her seem exotic and mysterious. She was good with the customers, knew how to keep a conversation going, and always left generous tips for the bartenders. The manager, a man named Eddie Caruso, said she was one of his best hostesses. She had this way of making people feel important, like they were the only person in the room. That's a rare talent. Vale frowned. So Catherine was invisible, and Isabel was unforgettable. Two completely opposite personalities. Mallory nodded. Which means she was good at this. Really good. She didn't just change her name. She changed everything about herself. The way she talked, the way she acted, the way people saw her. They found one more lead, a man named Thomas Gray. He was a regular at the Sapphire Room and had been seen talking to Isabelle Rousseau on several occasions. When Mallory and Vale tracked him down, Gray was nervous. He was a banker, well-dressed, well-spoken, and clearly uncomfortable being questioned by a detective and a journalist. "I barely knew her," Gray said, avoiding eye contact. "We talked a few times. That's all." Vale leaned forward. "What did you talk about?" "Nothing important. Just small talk. She was friendly. I liked talking to her. That's all there was to it." Mallory wasn't buying it. Did she ever mention anything about her past? Where she came from? Why she was in Haven City? Gray hesitated. Then he sighed. "She told me once that she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd trusted the wrong person, and it had cost her everything. She said she was trying to start over, but she was afraid it might be too late." "Too late for what?" Vale asked. "She didn't say, but I got the feeling she thought someone was going to find her, that no matter how careful she was, it was only a matter of time." Mallory and Vale left Gray's office with more questions than answers. Who was the woman, really? What mistake had she made? And who was she afraid of? They spent the next 2 days going through every scrap of evidence they could find. They checked hotel registers, train records, financial transactions. They talked to landlords, shopkeepers, cab drivers. They followed every thread, no matter how thin. And slowly, a picture started to form. The woman had been careful, almost impossibly careful. She'd paid for everything in cash. She'd never used the same alias twice. She'd moved between her two identities seamlessly, never staying in one place long enough for anyone to get too curious. But she'd made one mistake, one tiny, almost invisible mistake that would eventually lead Mallory and Vale right to her. She'd sent a letter, just one, from Catherine Eldridge's apartment to a post office box in Philadelphia. The letter had been postmarked 3 weeks before she disappeared. Vale managed to track down the post office box. It was registered under the name Eleanor Carr, another alias. But when they contacted the Philadelphia police, they found something interesting. Eleanor Carr had been reported missing 2 years ago. She'd been a school teacher in Philadelphia, and one day she'd simply stopped showing up to work. Her apartment had been cleaned out. Her bank account had been emptied. She was gone. Vale read through the missing person report, her eyes widening. Eleanor Carr disappeared in October of 1939. Catherine Eldridge and Isabelle Rousseau both appeared in Haven City in 1941. She didn't just create 2 new identities. She's been doing this for years. She's been disappearing and reappearing under different names over and over again. Mallory rubbed his jaw. So the question is, why? What's she running from? They found the answer in an old newspaper clipping from Philadelphia. It was a small article, barely a few paragraphs long, buried in the back pages. It was about a man named Victor Beaumont. He'd been a prominent lawyer in Philadelphia, well-connected, well-respected. But in 1939, he'd been accused of embezzling money from his clients. The case had been building, but before it could go to trial, Victor Beaumont had died in a car accident. The case was closed. The money was never recovered. But here's the thing. Eleanor Carr had been Victor Beaumont's secretary. She'd worked for him for 3 years before she disappeared. And according to the article, investigators had wanted to question her about the embezzlement, but by the time they went looking for her, she was already gone. Vale looked at Mallory. She took the money. Eleanor Carr, or whatever her real name is, took the money and ran. And she's been running ever since. Mallory nodded slowly. But if Beaumont's dead and the case is closed, why is she still running? Why keep changing identities? Why disappear again and again? Because someone else wants that money. Someone who knows she has it. And they've been hunting her this whole time. That's when everything clicked into place. The woman wasn't just running from the law. She was running from someone far more dangerous. Someone who wouldn't stop until they found her. And that someone had finally tracked her to Haven City. Mallory and Vale went back to Mrs. Hoffman's boarding house. They asked her if anyone else had come looking for Catherine Eldridge. Mrs. Hoffman thought for a moment, then nodded. Yes, there was a man. Came by about a week ago. Well-dressed, polite. Said he was an old friend of Catherine's and wanted to surprise her. I told him she wasn't staying here anymore. He thanked me and left. What did he look like? Mallory asked. Tall, dark hair, had an accent. European, I think. Maybe German or Austrian. Vale's heart sank. They were too late. Whoever had been hunting the woman had already found her. And now, she was gone again. They spent the next 3 days searching for any sign of her. They checked every train station, every bus depot, every hotel in the city. Nothing. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. But Vale refused to give up. She kept digging, kept asking questions, kept following the smallest leads. And then she found it. A receipt from a pawn shop on the edge of town. The receipt was dated the day after the woman had disappeared. Someone had pawned a diamond bracelet. The description matched a bracelet that had been listed among Isabelle Rousseau's personal belongings. Vale went to the pawn shop and showed the owner the photographs of Catherine and Isabelle. The owner squinted at the pictures. Yeah, I remember her. Came in looking nervous. Sold me the bracelet for cheap. Said she needed the cash fast. Did she say where she was going? No. But I heard her talking to herself while she was waiting. She kept saying something about needing to get to the docks before midnight. The docks. Mallory and Vale raced across the city. Haven City's docks were a sprawling maze of warehouses, piers, and cargo ships. It was the kind of place where people could disappear easily, where questions weren't asked, and cash was the only thing that mattered. They searched for hours. Warehouse after warehouse, pier after pier. And just when they were about to give up, Vale spotted something. A small boarding house near the South Pier. It was run down. The kind of place where sailors and drifters stayed for a night or two before moving on. Vale showed the owner the photographs. The owner nodded. She was here. Left yesterday morning. Paid for 1 night. Didn't say much. Did she say where she was going? No. But I saw her get on a cargo ship, the Marguerite, headed for South America. Mallory and Vale stood on the pier, watching the empty space where the ship had been. They were too late. The woman was gone. She'd disappeared again. And this time, they had no way of following her. Vale stared out at the water, her arms crossed. She's good. I'll give her that. She played everyone, built 2 lives, vanished from both. And now she's on her way to start all over again somewhere else. Mallory nodded. But we know who she is now. Or at least, we know what she's done. Eleanor Carr, Catherine Eldridge, Isabelle Rousseau. How many other names has she used? How many other lives has she lived? Probably more than we'll ever know. They walked back to the precinct in silence. The case was officially closed. The woman was gone, and there was no evidence to suggest she was a danger to anyone but herself. The embezzled money was still missing, but that was Philadelphia's problem, not theirs. Mallory filed the report. Vale wrote the story. And life in Haven City moved on. But here's the thing. 3 months later, Vale received a letter. No return address. No signature. Just a few lines written in elegant handwriting on expensive paper. Thank you for not looking too hard. Some people are better off disappearing. The money's gone. Spent on new lives for people who needed them more than Victor Beaumont's clients ever did. I hope you understand. I hope you can forgive me. And I hope you never have to run the way I did." Vale showed the letter to Mallory. He read it twice, then handed it back to her. "What are you going to do with it?" Vale folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her coat pocket. "Nothing. She's gone. Let her stay gone." And that's how the case of the lady who vanished twice ended. Not with answers, but with more questions. Not with justice, but with mercy. Because sometimes, the truth isn't about catching the person who ran. It's about understanding why they had to run in the first place. The woman who called herself Catherine Eldridge and Isabel Rousseau was never found. The money was never recovered. And to this day, no one knows how many other names she used or how many other lives she built and abandoned. But Vale kept that letter. She kept it as a reminder that not every mystery needs to be solved, that not every disappearance is a crime, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone vanish into the smoke and mirrors they've created for themselves. Because in a city like Haven City, where shadows are long and secrets are currency, the real trick isn't making yourself disappear. It's making people forget you were ever there at all. So that's the story of the lady who vanished twice. A woman who lived 2 lives, told 2 stories, and left behind nothing but questions, and a single letter that said more than any confession ever could. Mallory went back to his desk and his lukewarm coffee. Vale went back to her typewriter and her next story. And the woman? She became a ghost, a legend, a whisper in the dark corners of Haven City that people still talk about when they want to believe that escape is possible. But here's the real twist. About 6 months after that letter arrived, Vale was covering a story about a charity organization in Haven City. The organization helped women who were fleeing dangerous situations, women who needed new identities, new lives, new chances. And when Vale looked at the financial records, she found something interesting: anonymous donations, large amounts of cash, delivered in unmarked envelopes over the course of several years. Vale never wrote about it. She never told Mallory. But she knew. She knew where the money had gone. She knew what the woman had done with it. And she knew that sometimes the people we chase aren't villains. They're just survivors trying to make things right in the only way they know how. The woman, who was Eleanor Carr, who became Catherine Eldridge, who transformed into Isabel Rousseau, had spent years running, but she hadn't been running away from justice. She'd been running towards something bigger, something that mattered more than her own survival. She'd taken money from people who didn't need it and given it to people who did. She'd built lives for herself not to hide, but to help. And when her time in Haven City was up, when the shadows got too close and the danger got too real, she vanished one more time. But this time, she left something behind. She left a legacy. Vale folded the financial records and put them in the same drawer as the letter. She closed the drawer. She locked it, and she never opened it again. Mallory eventually retired from the force. He spent his last years writing a memoir about the cases he'd worked, the criminals he'd caught, and the mysteries he'd never solved. The lady who vanished twice got her own chapter. But Mallory didn't write it like a failure. He wrote it like a lesson, a reminder that not every case ends with handcuffs and confessions. Some cases end with understanding, with respect, with the quiet acknowledgement that sometimes letting someone go is the right thing to do. Haven City moved on, new crimes, new mysteries, new shadows, but every once in a while, someone would mention the lady who vanished twice, and people would lean in, their voices dropping to a whisper, and they'd tell the story all over again. They'd talk about the 2 lives, the 2 names, the 2 faces that were really just one woman trying to outrun her past. And maybe that's the real mystery. Not who she was, but why we care. Why we're drawn to stories of people who disappear. Why we want to believe that it's possible to shed your skin, step into a new life, and become someone else entirely. Maybe it's because deep down, we all have things we want to run from, mistakes we want to bury, versions of ourselves we want to leave behind. The lady who vanished twice understood that. She lived it, and in the end, she got away with it. Not because she was smarter than everyone else, but because she understood something fundamental about human nature. We see what we want to see. We believe what we want to believe. And if you're careful enough, if you're patient enough, if you're willing to sacrifice everything you are for a chance to become something new, you can disappear. You can vanish into smoke and mirrors, and no one will ever find you. Because the best magic trick isn't making something disappear. It's making people forget it was ever there in the first place. Vale eventually left the Tribune. She became a novelist, writing mysteries and thrillers that were always just a little too close to the truth. People who knew her said she based her characters on real people she'd met during her years as a journalist. And maybe she did. Maybe the mysterious women in her novels, the ones who lived double lives and vanished without a trace, were all inspired by the same person. The lady who proved that you can be anyone you want to be, as long as you're willing to pay the price. And the price is high. It's loneliness. It's isolation. It's the constant fear that one day someone will see through the mask. That one day the past will catch up and the carefully constructed world you've built will come crashing down. But for some people, that price is worth it. For some people, the freedom to reinvent yourself, to start over, to disappear into a new life is worth more than anything else in the world. The lady who vanished twice knew that. She lived it every single day. And when she finally left Haven City for good, when she boarded that cargo ship and sailed away to some distant shore where no one knew her name and no one cared about her past, she must have felt something close to peace. Not happiness, maybe, but peace. The peace that comes from knowing you've done everything you can, that you've given everything you have, and that whatever comes next, you'll face it on your own terms. So here's the final truth about the lady who vanished twice. She wasn't a villain. She wasn't a hero. She was something in between, something human, something flawed and desperate and brilliant and broken, all at the same time. She was a woman who made a mistake, who stole money she shouldn't have taken, and who spent the rest of her life trying to make it right. She was a woman who understood that sometimes the only way to survive is to disappear. And she was a woman who proved that with enough skill, enough determination, and enough courage, you can become anyone you want to be, even if that person is nobody at all. If you want more mysteries like this, go ahead and check out the next video.